April 16th, 1945. Radar picket station number 1, 30 miles north of Okinawa. The USS Laffey, DD-724, a newly commissioned destroyer barely 6 months old, took position in waters that American sailors had grimly nicknamed Suicide Alley. Lieutenant Commander Frederick Becton, the ship's commanding officer, studied the pre-dawn horizon with the calm demeanour that would soon be tested beyond anything the Naval Academy had prepared him for. His crew of 336 men, many of them teenagers who had never seen combat, were about to face an assault so sustained and ferocious that it would redefine what human beings could endure. The radar picket duty was a death sentence assignment, and everyone knew it. These destroyers positioned themselves far from the main fleet, serving as early warning sentries against incoming Japanese aircraft. They were the first targets, the sacrificial pawns placed deliberately in harm's way to give the invasion fleet precious minutes of warning. In the 3 weeks since the Okinawa landings began on April 1st, the Japanese had already sunk 3 destroyers on picket duty and damaged a dozen more. The USS Bush and USS Calhoun had gone down just days earlier, overwhelmed by waves of kamikaze attacks that came without mercy or pause. Commander Becton was 41 years old, a veteran of convoy duty in the Atlantic and the Solomon Islands campaign. He had earned the Navy Cross for his actions commanding the destroyer USS Aaron Ward during the Battle of Guadalcanal. At 04:30 hours, the crew went to general quarters as they did every morning before dawn, the most dangerous time when attacks could come out of the rising sun. The men took their positions at the 5-inch guns, the 40mm mounts, the 20mm positions. Below decks, damage control parties stood ready with firefighting equipment and repair materials. The morning of April 16th began quietly. By 0600 hours, Becton ordered the crew to stand down to Condition 2, allowing half the men to grab breakfast. The ship's cook served pancakes and bacon, coffee and orange juice, a meal that many would not finish. At 0700 hours, the radar operators detected the first contacts bearing 350 degrees, range 40 miles and closing. The general quarters alarm sent men scrambling back to their battle stations. The Japanese High Command had designated April 16th as the day for Kikusui No. 6, the 6th mass kamikaze operation of the Okinawa campaign. Vice Admiral Motome Ugaki had assembled every available aircraft from bases across Kyushu for this coordinated assault. Conventional fighters, obsolete trainers, anything that could carry a bomb was pressed into service. The pilots, many with fewer than 60 hours of flight time, had received minimal training. Their sole mission was to crash their aircraft into American ships, transforming themselves into guided missiles of flesh and explosives. At 0800 hours, the first wave appeared. 4 Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters approached on the horizon. The Laffey's forward 5-inch gun mount opened fire at maximum range. The first Zero disintegrated in a ball of orange flame 3 miles out. The second aircraft pressed through the defensive fire, boring in on the destroyer's port side. Every gun that could bear opened up, tracers creating a cone of steel that seemed impenetrable. The Zero took multiple hits but kept coming. At 200 yards, the aircraft exploded from concentrated 40mm fire, showering the ship with burning debris but causing no damage. The third and fourth attackers split up, attempting to overwhelm the defences from multiple angles simultaneously. This tactic recognized that American ships could concentrate devastating fire against single targets but struggled when forced to divide their attention. The portside 40mm quad mount caught the third Zero in a sustained burst that cut the aircraft in half. The fourth Zero came in so low it was skimming the wave tops. At the last moment, a 20mm gunner caught the aircraft with a burst that severed the control cables. The Zero cartwheeled into the water, missing the ship's stern by less than 30 feet. 4 attackers destroyed, 0 hits. The crew had seconds to breathe before radar reported more contacts inbound. 7 aircraft approached from multiple directions, a coordinated assault that stretched the ship's defensive capabilities to the breaking point. Commander Becton ordered the helmsman to increase speed to 32 knots and began executing radical evasive maneuvers, throwing the destroyer into hard turns that made accurate gunnery nearly impossible for both sides. The Japanese pilots came in nearly simultaneously from different quadrants. A Yokosuka D-4Y Judy dive bomber, plunged toward the ship from 10,000 feet in a near-vertical dive. The 5-inch guns couldn't elevate fast enough. At 1,500 feet, the Judy pulled out slightly to correct its aim, and the starboard gun crew walked their fire directly into the aircraft's engine. The bomber exploded with such force that the blast wave rattled instruments in the Combat Information Center. Simultaneously, 2 more Zeros attacked from opposite sides. The portside aircraft disintegrated 200 yards out. The starboard attacker penetrated the defensive fire, absorbing hits that should have destroyed it. At 08:23, travelling at nearly 300 miles per hour, the Zero struck the Laffey just after the forward 5-inch gun mount. The impact was catastrophic. The aircraft's 500-pound bomb penetrated the deck and exploded deep inside the ship, tearing through crew berthing spaces and destroying the forward emergency diesel generator. 20 men died instantly. Fire erupted throughout the forward sections as aviation gasoline ignited. The forward 5-inch mount was knocked out of action, its crew killed or wounded. Damage control parties raced forward, dragging hoses through smoke so thick that visibility dropped to 0. Electrician's mate. Second-class Robert Carr led a team into the burning compartments, crawling through twisted metal and scalding steam to reach wounded men trapped by debris. The fires threatened the forward magazine, which held hundreds of 5-inch shells. If that magazine exploded, the entire forward section would be obliterated. Commander Becton never considered withdrawing. The mission was to provide radar picket warning, and that mission continued until he was sunk or ordered to retire. He ordered the remaining guns to maintain defensive fire while damage control fought the blazes below. Despite the carnage forward, the aft 5-inch mount continued firing. The 40mm batteries never paused. The 20mm gunners kept their weapons trained skyward. At 08:35, the second major wave arrived. 11 aircraft attacked from every compass point simultaneously. The Japanese tactical coordination had improved dramatically. These pilots understood they were going to die, but they were determined to take American ships with them. The mathematics were brutally simple. If 11 aircraft attacked and even 2 got through, the cumulative damage would likely sink the destroyer. The Laffey's remaining weapons opened fire in a crescendo of explosions. The aft 5-inch gun was firing so rapidly that the barrel began to glow red hot. The 40mm crews were going through ammunition at rates that would have been considered wasteful in any other circumstance. Empty shell casings piled up around gun positions in gleaming brass drifts. Gunners developed burns on their hands from handling weapons that had been firing continuously. Nobody complained. Nobody slowed down. The first attacker, a Valdiv bomber, came in at such a steep angle it appeared to be falling straight down. The pilot held his dive until below 1,000 feet. At 800 feet, concentrated fire found the mark. The Val exploded in midair directly above the destroyer, sending flaming wreckage cascading down. A section of wing slammed into the aft deckhouse, crushing a 20mm mount and killing its 3-man crew instantly. The Val's bomb tumbled into the sea 20 feet from the starboard side. The underwater detonation lifted the entire ship several feet, rupturing hull plates and opening seams that began flooding the aft engine room. 2 more Zeros attacked the wounded forward section. The first crashed into the wreckage of the forward gun mount, adding its own fuel and explosives to the inferno. The second aimed for the bridge where Becton stood directing the defense. A burst from a 40mm mount caught this aircraft perfectly, but its momentum carried wreckage forward. Pieces struck the bridge structure, wounding several men. A fragment of propeller blade embedded itself in the bulkhead 6 inches from Becton's head. Another Judy dive bomber penetrated the defensive fire through statistical inevitability. This aircraft came through completely unscathed until the final 200 yards. The 20mm gunners poured fire into the diving bomber at point-blank range. The Judy shuddered but never deviated. At 08:42, it struck the Laffey on the starboard side amidships, the impact penetrating to the waterline before the bomb exploded. The detonation opened a hole in the hull 15 feet across. Seawater poured into the ship at tons per second. The starboard side began listing immediately. Ensign James Youngblood ordered immediate counterflooding on the port side, deliberately flooding intact compartments to balance the weight and prevent capsizing. It was a desperate measure that traded buoyancy for stability. The crew was now fighting 3 simultaneous battles. The The gunners continued engaging incoming aircraft without pause. The damage control parties fought fires and flooding in a dozen locations. The engineering spaces struggled to keep power flowing despite mounting damage. Men were operating in smoke-filled compartments with visibility measured in inches, working by feel and memory. In the forward fire room, water from ruptured steam lines was scalding everything it touched. Throughout the ship, wounded men refused evacuation because that would leave their battle stations undermanned. At 0850, radar reported more contacts inbound. 6 aircraft were coming from the northwest, low altitude, the same direction as the morning sun. Becton ordered the Laffey to turn directly into the threat, presenting the smallest target profile while bringing maximum weapons to bear. The 6 aircraft were a mixed formation that dissolved as they approached. Japanese kamikaze tactics had evolved, incorporating lessons learned through brutal attrition. They attacked in coordinated groups, splitting up at the last moment to divide defensive fire. They approached from the direction of the sun. They targeted ships that were already damaged. The Laffey, smoking heavily and listing noticeably, was exactly the kind of target these tactics emphasized. The leading Zero came in at wavetop height, so low its propeller was kicking up spray. The starboard gun crews held their fire, waiting for a clear shot. At 800 yards, every gun opened fire simultaneously. The convergence of tracers looked like a solid stream of light. The Zero simply disintegrated, blown to fragments by concentrated 40mm fire. The second and third attackers came in higher, diving from 5,000 feet. The aft 5-inch mount engaged the higher target while 40mm batteries concentrated on the lower threat. The high-diving Val took a direct hit at 3,000 feet. The proximity fuse detonated the shell 15 yards from the aircraft, and the blast wave flipped the bomber completely inverted. The lower Zero pressed its attack through a wall of fire. Pieces were being shot away, but the pilot maintained control. At 200 yards, 20mm fire finally severed something critical. The Zero nosed down sharply and struck the water 30 yards from the port side. 3 more aircraft were already attacking. The Japanese were timing their approaches to give the American gunners no respite. At 0900 hours, a damaged Zero suddenly rolled into a dive toward the ship. This attack came from an unexpected angle. The Zero struck the Laffey's stern, hitting the aft 5-inch gun mount directly. The impact destroyed the mount, killed the entire gun crew, and triggered a massive explosion as ready ammunition detonated. Fires erupted immediately. The ship now had only 2 operational 5-inch guns remaining. 2 more Vals approached from astern, taking advantage of limited defensive coverage. The first Val took hits and veered off, trailing smoke. The second Val pressed through and struck the ship hull on the portside aft, adding another bomb explosion and fire to the accumulating damage. The explosion ruptured fuel tanks, sending diesel oil spreading across the water. Below decks, the situation was approaching critical. Water was rising in multiple compartments faster than pumps could handle. The list to starboard was increasing despite counter-flooding efforts. In some compartments, men were working in complete darkness. The heat from fires was making conditions unbearable, temperatures rising above 130 degrees in some locations. At 0915, the Val that had veered off returned. It came in low and fast from the starboard quarter. 2 40mm mounts tracked the Val through its approach, slowly chewing away at the aircraft. But the damage wasn't enough. At 0917, the Val crashed into the starboard side at the waterline. This was the 5th direct hit, and it opened catastrophic flooding in the forward engine room. Water poured in with such force that the compartment was completely flooded within 2 minutes. The men stationed there died at their posts. The loss of the forward engine room meant the Laffey's speed dropped from 32 knots to less than 20. This made the ship an easier target and reduced effectiveness of evasive maneuvers. The destroyer was slowing, listing heavily, burning in multiple locations. The Japanese pilots circling overhead could see the ship was mortally wounded. They pressed their attacks with renewed intensity. At 0925, 3 more aircraft attacked nearly simultaneously. Becton made a decision that violated every instinct of self-preservation. Instead of maneuvering to evade, he ordered the ship to maintain steady course and speed. This made the Laffey an easier target, but it also allowed gun crews to establish accurate firing solutions without constantly adjusting for the ship's movement. It was a calculated trade, exchanging reduced mobility for improved gunnery. The gun crews responded with the most accurate fire they had delivered all morning. The first Zero was hit at 800 yards and exploded in a ball of flames so intense that heat was felt on deck. The second aircraft, a Judy, was tracked by both operational 5-inch guns firing in carefully coordinated barrage. It took a direct hit at 1,500 yards and simply ceased to exist. The third attacker, another Zero, came in from directly ahead, boring straight toward the bridge. This Zero absorbed hits from at least 3 different gun positions but kept coming. At the last moment, 20mm fire struck the Zero's propeller and engine. The aircraft flipped inverted and crashed into the sea just 10 yards from the bow. The crew had destroyed 3 more attackers, but they were at the absolute limit of endurance. Men were collapsing at their stations from exhaustion and smoke inhalation. Several gun positions were unmanned because everyone assigned was dead or wounded. Ammunition was running critically low for the 40mm guns. The bow was so far down that waves were breaking over the forward deck. The list to starboard had increased to 20 degrees. Fires were still burning in 4 separate locations, and radar was reporting more contacts inbound. The radarman's response came after a long pause. I count 4 confirmed, possibly 5. Range 8 miles and closing. The crew prepared for what everyone understood might be the final attack. Throughout the ship, men who had been fighting continuously for nearly 90 minutes prepared to do it again. The Japanese formation consisted of 4 Zeros and a single Judy dive bomber, the last aircraft the local air group could commit. Japanese commanders monitoring the battle had been receiving radio reports from attacking pilots. They knew this American destroyer had been hit multiple times and should have sunk already. The fact that it continued fighting had become intensely frustrating. The order went out. Finish it. Whatever it takes, sink that ship. The Judy came in first, diving from 12,000 feet in a near-vertical plunge. The 2 operational 5-inch guns tracked it through the dive, firing a carefully timed sequence. At 8,000 feet, the bomber was hit by a proximity-fused shell that damaged control surfaces. The aircraft began to wobble. At 6,000 feet, another hit knocked away part of the tail. The Judy went into an uncontrolled spin, tumbling out of the sky. It crashed into the ocean 100 yards from the ship. The 4 Zeros split into 2 pairs, attacking from opposite sides simultaneously in the classic pincer maneuver. The gun crews had to divide their fire, each side engaging 2 targets. The portside gunners concentrated fire on the lead aircraft, walking tracers up into the Zero's nose and engine. The fighter exploded at 400 yards. The second Zero on that side came through still under control, every gun that could bear fired. The Zero took hit after hit but kept coming. At 100 yards, when it seemed certain the Zero would strike, a final burst from a 40mm mount hit the pilot. The aircraft's nose dropped slightly, just enough that it passed under the ship's stern instead of striking it, and plunged into the water. On the starboard side, the battle was identical. The leading Zero was hit repeatedly, pieces flying off in every direction, but the pilot held his course. At 200 yards, the aircraft's wings folded up from battle damage and the Zero cartwheeled into the ocean. The final attacker, the last aircraft of Kikusui No. 6 to assault the USS Laffey, came in at such low altitude it was below the effective engagement angle for most weapons. Only the 20mm guns could depress low enough. 3 gun positions opened fire. The aircraft flew through a crossfire that should have been absolutely lethal, but somehow it survived. At 50 yards, close enough that men could see individual details of the aircraft's construction, a 20mm gunner walked his fire directly across the Zero's cockpit. The canopy shattered, the pilot slumped forward, and the aircraft nosed down into the water. It struck the sea just 20 feet from the ship's starboard side. The explosion of the Zero's bomb underwater created a shockwave that rattled every plate and rivet in the hull. But there was no impact on the ship itself. The final attacker had missed. The attack was over. For several minutes, nobody moved. Men stood at their battle stations, weapons trained on empty sky, waiting for more contacts that didn't appear. The sudden absence of diving aircraft and exploding shells created a silent throw that felt somehow wrong. Gradually, the crew began to comprehend that they had survived. The ship was still afloat, still making way, still capable of fighting. They had faced 22 separate kamikaze attacks in 80 minutes, and the Laffey was still here. The damage assessment took hours. The destroyer had been struck by 6 kamikazes and 4 bombs from aircraft shot down close enough that their ordnance exploded near the ship. The forward section was completely destroyed, the bridge heavily damaged, the aft gun mount gone, and there were holes in the hull in 7 locations. 32 men were dead, another 71 wounded. More than a third of the crew were casualties. The ship was down by the bow, listing 20 degrees to starboard, with fires still burning. Maximum speed was 12 knots. Of the 6 5-inch guns the ship started with, only 2 remained operational. More than half the 20mm guns were out of action. By every reasonable standard, the USS Laffey should have sunk. The cumulative damage exceeded what many capital ships could survive. Destroyers were lightly built vessels designed for speed and firepower, not to absorb punishment. The Laffey had taken damage that would have destroyed 2 or 3 normal destroyers and yet remained afloat. The reasons were multiple. The ship's construction incorporated lessons learned from 3 years of war. Improved compartmentalization meant flooding could be isolated. Better firefighting equipment meant fires could be controlled. Redundant systems meant loss of one generator or pump didn't cripple the entire ship. But beyond engineering, the difference was the crew. The damage control parties had fought with determination that bordered on superhuman. When fires threatened the forward magazine, they flooded it. When the ship began to capsize from asymmetric flooding, they counter-flooded to restore balance. When electrical power failed, they ran emergency cables. They performed these tasks in darkness, in smoke, in spaces filled with scalding steam and toxic fumes. While the ship was under continuous attack, they saved the Laffey through training and leadership that cannot be improvised but must be built through hundreds of hours of practice. The gunnery performance was similarly extraordinary. Against 22 attacking aircraft, the crew achieved 20 confirmed kills, with 2 more listed as probable. This 91% kill rate represented performance that exceeded anything in American after-action reports to that date. The rate of fire maintained by the 5-inch guns would have been considered impossible by pre-war standards. This performance came from teenagers who had been civilians 18 months earlier, trained to Navy standards and led by officers who had learned their trade in the crucible of the Pacific War. At 1100 hours, the nearby destroyer USS Macomb came alongside to provide assistance. The Macomb had been operating as part of the same radar picket station, but had been stationed several miles away and had not been targeted. Now she moved in to help her battered sister ship, providing medical personnel, damage control equipment, and protective escort. The Macomb's crew could only stare in shock at the Laffey's condition. The destroyer looked like she had been through a month-long siege rather than a 90-minute battle. The transit back to the anchorage at Hagushi Bay took 7 hours at reduced speed. Becton remained on the bridge the entire time, refusing medical attention for his wounds until the ship was safely anchored. When the Laffey finally dropped anchor at 1730 hours, the setting sun illuminated a ship that had been transformed from a pristine man of war into a battle-scarred wreck. But she was afloat. She was under her own power, and she had maintained her radar picket station until officially relieved. The mission had been completed. News of the Laffey's survival spread through the fleet with remarkable speed. Sailors from other ships came to see the destroyer that had fought off 22 kamikazes, wanting to verify that such a thing was actually possible. The Laffey became an inspiration, proof that the kamikazes could be beaten, that determination and skill could overcome even the most fanatical attacks. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, commander of the amphibious forces at Okinawa, visited the ship personally on April 17th. He decorated Commander Becton on the spot and told the assembled crew that they had written a page in naval history that would be remembered as long as men go to sea. Turner recommended Becton for the Navy Cross, which was approved, and put the entire ship in for a presidential unit citation. The Japanese perspective on the battle came from interrogation reports of captured pilots and documents recovered after the war. The attacks on Radar Picket Station 1 had been considered a maximum effort, committing more aircraft to the destruction of a single destroyer than operational doctrine normally allowed. The Japanese commanders had believed, reasonably, that such overwhelming force would guarantee the target's destruction. The fact that this destroyer survived became a source of significant consternation. If 22 aircraft couldn't sink one destroyer, how many would be needed? The mathematics of attrition were turning against the kamikaze strategy. The USS Laffey underwent emergency repairs at Hagushi Bay, then sailed to Saipan for more extensive work. From there, she went to the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Seattle, where she would spend months being rebuilt. She would return to service after the war ended, serving in the Atlantic Fleet through the Cold War years. In 1975, the Laffey was decommissioned and became a museum ship at Patriots Point in Charleston, South Carolina, where she remains today. Commander Becton received the Navy Cross for his leadership during the battle. He would later command the cruiser USS Los Angeles and retire as a rear admiral. Many of his crew received individual decorations for their actions on April 16th, though the real award was simply having survived. The men who fought that day carried the experience with them for the rest of their lives. They had faced death 22 times in 80 minutes and refused to yield. They had turned their ship into an unsinkable legend through courage, training, and the simple stubborn refusal to be broken. The story of the USS Laffey became legend in naval circles, studied at the Naval Academy and the Naval War College as an example of damage control excellence and leadership under extreme stress. The ship that should have been an easy kill for Japanese kamikaze pilots became instead a testament to what properly trained sailors could achieve when pushed beyond all reasonable limits. From the Japanese pilot's perspective, circling overhead that morning, watching their comrades crash into this destroyer again and again only to see it continue fighting, the Laffey must have seemed truly unsinkable. That perception was exactly what the United States Navy needed as it faced the kamikazes in the final months of the Pacific War. The Laffey proved that these suicide attacks could be survived, that American ships and American sailors could take everything the enemy could deliver and still prevail. In that sense, the ship's survival was more than just one destroyer refusing to sink. It was the embodiment of American naval power's refusal to be broken by the most desperate weapon Japan could devise. The USS Laffey fought 22 kamikazes in 80 minutes and emerged victorious not because she was the strongest ship or the most heavily armed, but because her crew refused to accept defeat. That refusal, multiplied across hundreds of ships and thousands of sailors, would carry the Navy through the bloodiest campaign of the Pacific War and into final victory just 4 months later.